Hello and welcome. Akua here. I also respond to Aqua and Akia. I'm a certified executive coach, recognized facilitator, and speaker. And my favorite thing to do is to support executives and leaders of all kinds with where they need to focus their time and energy each and every single day. And I'm really excited about today's topic. I actually have really enjoyed all the different topics that I have been going live about this week. So maybe I can do a quick recap. So on Monday, I talked a little bit about what the role of a coach is and what coaching is. On Tuesday, I'm trying to even remember these topics. Let me take a look at my notes because they're right here. So let's see. On Tuesday, I talked a little bit about, so Monday, this was a really fun, actually, live stream name. I called it, It's Cheaper to Read a Book, but Here Are 5 Reasons Why You Might Want to Hire a Coach. On Tuesday, asking for help as a leader doesn't make you look weak. And I talked about 3 case studies. So I shared 3 case studies from leaders that I've supported at different levels. So I talked about some founders, I talked about some business owners, and I also talked about some intrapreneurs, so professionals. And so I shared 3 case studies of supporting leaders from going from reactive to proactive. And let's see, today, really excited about the topic today. And I also, if you are joining me on at least LinkedIn, I can do this on LinkedIn. Unfortunately, I can't do this on Instagram. But today I'll be talking about the top 3 questions, that leaders ask themselves when deciding to invest in themselves. And I'll be doing a quick sort of walkthrough of my program that I've renamed the Proactive Leader. So if that does sound interesting to you, please, continue to listen in, or you can bookmark this and come back to it later on. But just really excited about the topic I'm sharing today. And it really is all about, reflecting on what is stopping you from investing in yourself. And because of the work I do, I hear a lot of objections. I hear a lot of people sort of, telling me the reasons why they can't necessarily invest in themselves, right? So through working with me, they're really investing in themselves and investing in their businesses. And so I wanted to talk through some of the top ones that I've heard. A lot of these are things that I also mention as well. And the key thing here is just to give you potentially an alternative perspective, another thing to maybe reflect on, and just give you an opportunity to really think about where you're spending your time, your energy, and of course, your financial resources as well. So when I think about some of the top objections that really come up for the people that decide to work with me or even don't necessarily want to work with me, I would say there's 3 basic ones at the end of the day. And I'll be covering all of them to some extent with what I've picked out here. But the first is typically, I don't have time, right? I don't have time, right? Which could also mean I don't want to make the time. This is not worth my time, right? There's so many different ways that this could potentially look. But what I hear a lot, or what people tell me directly, is I don't have time. The second thing I hear a lot, and typically people don't always feel as comfortable saying the second thing, but the other thing I hear a lot is I don't have the money, which also could mean this is not worth it to me. I don't want to invest in this, right? I don't see the value, right? So once again, just recognizing that there's so many ways in which these same sort of responses could potentially be interpreted, or they could be covering for something else. The last thing that I put here, and I think a lot of times these first 2 elements are actually very much related to this last piece, but another way I've heard it come out is, I don't know if this is the right investment for me and my business, right? Which could also mean this is not the right time. I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't see the value. All right. So if you've ever thought any of these things, let me know in the comments. I'd be really curious to know. You're also welcome to let me know in the chat as well. I do have that going. So really excited to see a few people are actually in the chat. So hello there. I see Charles there. I see David. Thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. If you have any questions, I'd love to hear from you. I also see Danny on Instagram. Legos Interior Designer. I haven't seen you in forever. I hope that you are doing well. So thank you all for those of you who are joining me. And once again, feel free to let me know in the chat if you have any thoughts, any questions. I want to make this as interactive as possible. I don't always put my lives out there early enough for people to necessarily be able to join. But today, at least if you're on LinkedIn, it's something that I was able to do. So let's get into some of these questions, right? Let me talk through some thoughts that really come up for me and some of the things that I think about in relation to some of these initial objections that I shared, right? And I think it's so important to take the time and really reflect on why you're doing what you're doing. So if anything, I really do welcome this. And I think sometimes for people who are service providers or even other coaches, they might get a bit upset by people asking questions or people coming to a point where they're trying to make a decision. I really welcome it. And if anything, the way in which I try to position my work, talk about my work, and even why I do lives like this is to really help people come to this decision, right? And make a decision that makes the best sense for them and for their business. Because at the end of the day, there is, right, a financial investment that is required to work with individuals like me. And so I want to make sure that people are doing it with the fullest amount of information that they can get, right? Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you so much for joining. And yeah, glad to hear that you hear some similar objections. So I appreciate that. Dave in the chat also says, finding or sourcing your energy is key. Have you got some ideas on this, as it's not actually about time? Yes, David, that is true. It is not about time at all. I talk a lot about that in my content. And yeah, maybe I actually will tap into a little bit about that as I answer, or as I talk about this first objection that I hear a lot. So the first objection I hear a lot, and I think that this is a critical question that any leader at whatever level you're at, whether you're an executive, whether you're a founder, a CEO, whether you're a middle manager, I think the first question that comes up for a lot of people that are deciding to invest in themselves, and once again, this investment might not be a coach. It could be investing in a personal trainer. It could be investing in something related to your personal life. It could be investing in something related to your team, right? But the first thing that a lot of people come up with, or the objection they have, is, can I afford this, right? And what I try to do here with this particular objection, and I'm going to get into it a little bit, is really just recognizing that this objection, right, covers that potentially that time component, or that energy component, right? As David, I think, rightfully brought up, right? It's not necessarily about time. It's more about energy and where your energy is going and where you're willing to put that energy or not put that energy, right? So it can cover time, right? It can cover money, right? And the way I actually like to really talk about it, and this is something that I even share with early stage founders that I sometimes support as a mentor within accelerators, is, do you have the capacity to implement, right? So ultimately, I think that that's the point that people need to get to, right? That's the question they need to ask themselves. Do I have the capacity to implement, right? So even if you do have the financial resources, are you willing, right, to honor the time, right? Spend the energy to implement whatever you're looking to do, all right? So for a lot of people that ask themselves this question, these are some things that sort of come up for me. Really just recognizing that so many of us are busy, right? So many of us are doing so many things, right? And I think busy, once again, can be defined differently for different people. So you need to decide what busy looks like for you. One of the things that I always like to talk about is, when people look at my calendar, they're like, oh, you seem so busy. And I'd be like, actually, no, I'm not like busy in the sense that I'm not overwhelmed, but I do try to be very intentional about where my time is going. So if you look at my calendar, my time is not available, right? All my time is not available to everyone. I'm very intentional about how I sort of segment my time, and I make sure that I leave time to be able to implement the things I need to implement. So really just recognizing that this word busy, or the concept busy, is something that we all need to spend a little bit more time investigating, getting a little bit more curious about, and potentially doing a time audit on, can really help you distinguish between whether or not you're busy doing the right things, or you're busy doing things that aren't going to lead you closer to your goal. So that's really the huge bit here when we are thinking about, do I have the time? Do I have the capacity, right? So are you really focused on the right things, right? Are you, quote unquote, busy doing the things that are going to get you closer to your business? And so when I think about the work that I do, right, my job, or my role, is really to support leaders with making sure that they're concentrating and focusing on the things that are get them closer to their goal. And that could also be the same thing when you're thinking about investing in other types of service providers, other types of services, or other types of programs, whether that's about your personal, your professional development, or whether that's even thinking about investing in something for a kid if you have one, right? Really just recognizing that that's the key part here. Where am I actually spending my time and energy, and is it leading me closer to my goals? And if working with an individual like me would lead you closer to your goals, right, that once again will potentially help you make a decision on whether or not to invest. Another key thing here when we are thinking about, can I afford to invest in this, is really just recognizing, or trying to get a better understanding of what that upside is, right? What would I get in return for doing this? If I do spend time and energy in this thing, what could the potential outcome be? What would the potential return on investment be? And that probably gets us to reflecting a little bit more on the more monetary or financial side of asking that question, can I afford to invest in this, right? So once we get beyond the time and energy piece, can I create that time? Can I honor the time? Can I actually implement that next piece, of course, and this is probably what is on the top of mind for many people, is do I have the financial resources? And once again, right, you have to reflect on this and think to yourself, what is the outcome I want? All right. What's the return on investment? And does it make sense? And once again, if I think about this in conjunction with what I do, really just recognizing that by leveraging the types of services I provide, right? So with, the time you put in, the energy you put in, the financial resources that you put in, what's the upside, right? So recognizing one, you'll feel potentially better about yourself. You'll have a better control of your schedule, and you'll have more time and energy to work with others so that you can get more things done, right? Because we can't do any of this by ourselves, whether it's within your personal life or your professional life, you do need others, right, to support you. So working with someone like me allows you to see potentially where you can create that space, allows you to figure out how you can build routines and habits, right, to make sure that you are honoring that space, right, that you've created for yourself, that you've thought through how this might look like in terms of accountability, so that you can do, once again, or get closer to whatever that goal or vision is that you have for yourself, right? And I think the key thing here, once again, is when you are thinking about investing in yourself, right? Whether it's, for the outcome or the goal of having better relationships, better health, or better wealth, right? At the end of the day, sometimes working with someone who's been there before, right? Sometimes working with someone who is an expert or someone who can give you frameworks will allow you potentially get there faster, right? Or will allow you to build stronger relationships, allow you to build wealth faster, right? Or allow you to make sure that your health is where it needs to be, so you don't necessarily have to invest as much in, not preventative, but in this case, it would be preventative if you worked with someone with your health, but you wouldn't necessarily have to worry about your health in the same way in the long run. So really just recognizing that when you ask yourself, or you are thinking to yourself, can I afford this? And once again, a really important question for any leader to ask themselves when they're thinking about investing in themselves, right? Those are some of the things that you might want to consider. And I know, once again, as someone who's invested in a lot of coaches and lots of different things, that's a question I always ask myself, right? Another key thing that comes up sometimes for people when they are thinking about investing in themselves is, can I do this later, right? And so once again, you have to tap into your own, awareness. You have to reflect on, where am I now, right? What's happening now, and what needs to happen so a change can happen, right? Is this something that I can get away with not doing anything about right now? So those are all the things that you maybe want to reflect on when that first thought comes up, once again, right? Which is, can I afford to invest in this? Once again, if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the chat, or add a comment. But that's just one of the first questions I think any leader should be asking themselves, no matter what level they're at, and whether or not they're thinking about this from the perspective of their personal or their professional life. So let's get into the second one. The second one I have here in terms of thinking about who's going to invest in yourself is really a little bit more about whoever's helping to provide that service, whoever's helping to implement that program, or whatever you're looking to do. So that second one really is about who will be supporting me, right? So really just trying to get a better understanding of who that service provider is, or who that coach is, whatever it is you're looking to invest in. And while you're learning more about this individual, because at the end of the day, this type of work, and a lot of times when leaders are investing in themselves, this is relationship based. So I don't think that that is a weird thing to try and do, or a bad thing to try and do. So asking yourself, who will be supporting me? What is their approach? What level of access I will get, right? These are the things, once again, that you need to have a better understanding of, right? That will make it easier for you to make a decision about whether or not this is something you want to do, and whether or not it makes sense for you to do for a certain period of time. So why is it important to understand what you're looking for? It's super important because, specifically with the services I provide, there is a difference between consulting, mentoring, and coaching. And there are so many different ways to coach as well. So if you watch my live on Monday, I talk a little bit about the difference between consulting, mentoring, and coaching, and also therapy. So when you are looking to invest in yourself, especially when it comes to this sort of behavior change or professional development, it's really important that you understand the difference between those, because that, once again, will help to guide you where you potentially want to go. Right. So watch my live on Monday if you want to hear about the difference. Right. So that's the first piece, right? Like, what is it that I really need? Right. Is it that I need someone directly to tell me what to do? Do I need someone to help facilitate my thought process? Do I need support processing things? And all those different elements, right, are different ways to approach this and might look different. And you might need a different type of person to support you with that. They are not all the same. So that's a bit of trying to figure out who will support me, right? Or what type of support do I need? The next bit, right, is thinking about what is their approach. And as I mentioned before, specifically for the work that I do, right, there's so many different types of coaching. There's so many different types of coaches. So really, once again, getting very curious and reflecting on what is it I need. So in the case of the work that I do, right, I go through a 3-step process where I'm supporting leaders, right? So it's really about cultivating their self-awareness, thinking about how they're engaging and experimenting, and finally really reflecting on expectations and making sure that accountability is there. So that's my 3-step process that I use. Every coach does something a little bit more different, does something differently, approaches it differently. And it's really important that you get some clarity around that as well, because when you do decide to invest potentially specifically in a coach, it's really important that you are thinking about, having frameworks and approaches and tools that you can use moving forward. All right. If you're interested in hearing a little bit more about the 3-step approach that I take, that is something I actually will be talking about tomorrow. But I thought that it was really important to include that in this second sort of question that leaders should ask when deciding to invest in themselves. All right. In addition to that, I do think it's important also to know that individual's background. As I say that, I also think it's very important to mention, specifically with coaching, that not every coach necessarily has, a coaching degree or coaching certification, and that's fine. I've worked with many coaches, I think, that are fabulous, that haven't gone through any sort of coaching certification, but it's really up to you to decide, right? It's really up to you to get very clear on what that could potentially look like, right? So when it comes, just specifically talking to my experience, because that's all I can really speak about, of course, my, approach, right? The way in which I coach, the way in which I show up, the way in which I hold my clients accountable is really informed by my education, right? So I have an MBA in leadership. It's informed by my own experience. So I have experience actually leading teams between different markets, right? It's also informed by my certifications and my training. So I've invested a lot in my coach training because that's something that I could do, right? And then finally, it's also informed by my client results. So I've been working on this now. I think this is my 4th year going into it. So it's also informed by my clients' results. So those are the different things in which I tap into, right, to build out, how I support my clients. And once again, that's going to look very different for different service providers and different coaches, but you should be asking those questions, getting clarity on that, and making sure that's something that resonates with you. So the last piece I wanted to put here in relation to asking that question, who will be supporting me and how, is also making sure that you ask questions about, how that person's really going to support you or serve you, depending on what that service is, right? So you also need to be clear on what your learning style is and what makes the most sense for you. This is something that I even do within my onboarding process. I will ask my clients directly, like, what's incredibly helpful for them? How do they learn? What do they need, right, from a coach? Even if they've never worked with a coach before, what has worked in the past when they're learning new things or, getting outside their comfort zone. So making sure that you're very clear on those pieces will also make it easier for you to make a decision about whether or not you want to invest in something, right? Whether or not you want to invest in yourself, right? So a quick example for this is if you're someone who maybe is really bad at getting up super early in the morning, but you've decided to invest in a personal trainer who's going to come at 4:00 in the morning, right? That might not work out well for you, right? So being very curious and understanding how you show up and being aware of that will allow you to make better decisions about not only who you invest in, but also when you plan, right, to actually do those things that you're investing in, right? That's also key, right? When I have conversations with my clients, some of them are not really good in the morning. So it doesn't make sense to have a conversation that might make them somewhat uncomfortable or force them to get outside their comfort zone first thing in the morning. All right. The last one I put here in terms of the last question that I think successful leaders should ask themselves when deciding to invest in themselves is, what results do I want to get? Right. And I think this is so key. And one of the reasons why I actually added this to this conversation, I had a different question, then I added this, was because I was having a conversation with an old friend yesterday who comes from a very analytical background. I hadn't spoken to him in years. And I remember, just telling him, hey, I'm a coach. And he's like, what is that? Like, he had some idea of what a coach is, but what he wanted to understand was, how do I define the impact that I have as a coach, right? And I was like, that's such a great question, right? And I think that's a question that anyone who's looking to invest in themselves should ask, right? So in the case of the work I do, it's not necessarily impact that I have, but how do my clients define success? And it's my role, once again, as a leader to support my clients with that. If anything, a lot of the work I do as a coach is really around goal setting and vision setting at the end of the day, because I think that so many of us as leaders do such a poor job with it that we actually end up sort of psyching ourselves out because we feel like we haven't achieved enough, because our goals have been written in a way that that actually is not very conducive to actually achieving them, right? So when we think about this last question of what results do I want to get and how you set success, it's very important to recognize that what success is or what your goals are, specifically for coaching or any other service that you invest in, might evolve. But I think that having a starting point and recognizing that with that starting point, you can go someplace else. Okay. So I'm just checking my notes really quickly to make sure that I covered everything. But what I put here is you need to define this for yourself and constantly check in. And if you're working with a good service provider, and specifically I'm talking primarily about coaching here, and this is probably very similar to, at least when I've received therapy, it's very similar to that. You should constantly check in. And then also the service provider or therapist or coach will also constantly check in as well. Right. So I really think that you get to decide, right, what success looks like, of course, with the guidance of that service provider. And a key thing here also is to recognize, and I mentioned this previously, is that your goals are likely to shift and evolve, right? So if you are specifically thinking about working with a coach, it's really important that you make sure that you have a conversation around goal setting, what that looks like, and who's setting the goals. Because once again, that might look different coach to coach. All right. So those are the three questions I think that any leader should ask when deciding to invest in themselves. If you have any thoughts or any ideas of additional questions that I should add to it, please feel free to let me know in the comments or chat. But I just wanted to start it off with those three. So just a quick recap of what those three are. The first is, can I afford to invest in this? And recognizing that it's not just about money, but also time, right? And that capacity to actually implement, because that's really the difference between coaching and some of the other ways in which you could potentially do some personal development, right? So you can read a book, but once again, there's no accountability, and that point to implement, right, might look a little bit different. The second question I have here is, who will actually be supporting me, right? What is their approach? What level of access will I get, right? And recognizing that you might have different ideas of what that should look like. So it's very important that you're on the same page with that service provider or that coach. And the last question I have here is, what results do I want to get, right? How do I define success? And as I mentioned before, right, this is something that can evolve over time, but it's really important that you get very clear with whoever's supporting you on the first call or the second call to make sure you're on the same page, and then recognizing that this could evolve over time. All right. So thank you so much for those of you who are joining me on Instagram. I'm actually going to be closing off the Instagram live right now. I'll be continuing with my LinkedIn live simply because I'm actually going to be sharing my screen. If you are interested in learning a little bit more about the support I provide, and you want to ask me some of these questions, feel free to reach out. You're welcome to leave me a comment or just reach out in the DMs. I'd also welcome or invite you to actually check out my new program page where I talk all about my sort of rebranded and updated one-on-one program, which is called the Proactive Leader. It's a 3-month one-on-one comprehensive leadership program where I take people through my 3-step process of supporting leaders so they can really go from being very reactive to proactive. I'll be talking a little bit more about sort of that 3-step process that I go through tomorrow. So make sure that you tune in tomorrow if you want to hear that. So for those of you who are joining me on Instagram, thank you so much. I will chat to you tomorrow. All right, just closing that down there for those of you who are joining me on LinkedIn, because I do them at the same time. So for those of you who are on LinkedIn, what I just wanted to do, honestly, was just to take a second to share my program page where I actually talk all about my program and give a little bit more insight into how I support leaders and how I do this specifically one-on-one. So I'm just going to go ahead and add that to the screen right now. So hopefully you should be able to see it. Once again, if you have any questions about this, any thoughts about this, you are welcome. you are more than welcome to ask. Just trying to get this set up correctly. All right, well, my face won't be on it. That's absolutely fine. So just really quickly, this is what it looks like. Every single month, I work with about 5 leaders. As I mentioned before, I've actually rebranded it. I call it now the Proactive Leader. So it's a one-on-one leadership coaching engagement with comprehensive support. And it's really about helping you think about how you can go from being reactive, right, to proactive. And really, really excited about, the work I've been doing over the last 4 years. And it really just, encompasses all of that. The part I actually wanted to get to is this part, right? So really just recognizing that when you are thinking about investing in yourself, what are some of the things that come up? And I have found that with a lot of the people that are interested in my work, there are 2 basic buckets. The first bucket is that, I work with a lot of badass bosses. Like I work with a lot of high achieving, amazing leaders. And so for a lot of them, they say things like they want practical strategies. They're talking about how they're constantly winning awards and they have funding, but it's just getting so much more difficult for them to get things done by themselves. And they really are ready to transition from doing the work themselves to working through others. And the second set of leaders that I tend to work with are what I describe as well-connected but overextended founders. So once again, recognizing that they have this tribe, this army of mentors they could already be reaching out to. They're probably already doing a lot of personal development work, but they're ready for something different. They're ready for accountability outside of that bubble that they've created. So those are the 2 types of leaders that I tend to support, and that tend to come to me with the questions that I just shared earlier on. So if any of this sounds familiar, if you're interested in a little bit more, you're welcome to check out my program page. I will make sure that it is linked in the comments, and you're also welcome to sign up for a one-on-one consulting call where we can talk all about your personal goals, your professional goals, what's happening within your business or within your team, if that makes sense. And yeah, we can also talk about the resources I can provide, or I'm also happy to, introduce you to other people who could potentially support you as well. So just wanted to share that. I'm not going to go through the entire page. You are welcome to check this out. It's really easy to get to. It's just my website. So akuanm.com/work, and this will pop right up. And you are welcome to sign up for a quick 30-minute call where we can have a conversation. I can share information about my one-on-one work. And then of course, I'm happy to share any resources as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to join me once again today. I hope that these questions I shared were helpful. Once again, if you have any other questions or ideas on questions that leaders should ask when they're investing in themselves, feel free to leave it in the chat or feel free to leave it in the comments. I really appreciate those who had a chance to join me today. And as always, stay safe and stay sane. Thanks so much.